active soldiers and the reservists. As we mentioned earlier in the broadcast over the weekend, the IDF troop death toll has now risen to 156. And joining me now in studio is Zoe Brian, the founder of Startup Reserves for Israel. Thank you so very much for taking the time to be with me here this morning.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you a little bit about your organization. Tell us a little bit about what it is and where the idea came from to found it.
Absolutely. So Startup Reserves for Israel was founded on October 10th after the devastating news of October 7th, became clear to all of us. My husband and I were reading an article about a founder who was nervous about the 30% loss of his workforce that he was experiencing, and we just wanted to do something to help. We had donated money to relevant organizations, but wanted to be more hands-on. So we created this organization that was aiming to, place a couple of Americans in Israeli tech startups, hoping that it would take off. And, amazingly enough, 750 people signed up in the first night. Through word of mouth entirely. So it's been really incredible to see the resolve of the global Jewish, people supporting Israel right now.
What is it exactly when people register and want to take part in this? How is it that they assist the high-tech sector at the moment?
So they sign up and they share what their areas of expertise are. If they're marketers, then they're paired with startups that are seeking marketing support. Sales individuals will support startups that are, seeking support in sales. We've built a database of, now we have almost 4,500 volunteers globally. They're not all Jewish. They're what we're calling economic Zionists. They're people who believe in Israel and Israel's right to defend itself, and they want to help in however they can. So you can sign up to be a volunteer yourself and support an Israeli startup in this time, or you can also sign up if you are a startup who could use the benefit of a couple of extra hands on deck right now.
I do want to just point out to our audience that there are rocket alert sirens going off as we are currently on air at this hour around the Israel-Gaza border communities. I wanted to ask you, Zoe, is this a manageable hiccup? How dire is the situation? You mentioned that there was concern around what was going to happen, the impact it was going to have on the economy as well as the startups, but explain a little bit to the audience about how dire of a situation it is to keep Israel's high-tech sector afloat.
The U.S. and Israel's, global tech relationship is incredibly intertwined, not just in the U.S. but globally. And when the Israel startup ecosystem is suffering, globally, that landscape feels it as well. I believe the number is about 30% of the workforce here in Israel was called up to serve in the IDF reserve, in the reservists, and that has major impact. I think there's about 4,000 or 3,000 startups here in Israel. A number of those are much smaller, less than 10 people, and a 20%, 30% loss in hands is really significant, especially when often there are CEOs themselves or founders who are defending Israel right now.
Right, it almost seems that with bigger startup companies, obviously them taking a big hit to business as usual, but as you mentioned, with companies that have only 10 people, it's hard to imagine how they can even survive something like this.
Yeah. And we're not alone. There's a number of organizations that are doing amazing work to help where they can. There's an initiative called Wartime CEO that collects all these resources for smaller startup founders. It includes our resource, but there are a number of opportunities for smaller startups to seek help, both in Israel and abroad right now.
I'm really pleased that we're able to give you the platform here today to be able to explain what your idea was, and I'd like to ask you if you could speak to a little bit the audience in terms of how they can get involved. How is it that they can contact the organization or you, and what is it that they would need in order to get involved?
Absolutely. We are welcoming all volunteers from all walks of life globally who are willing to donate 10 hours a week to Israeli startups that need the support right now. And any Israeli tech startups that would like a couple of extra hands on deck, we are here as a resource for you. You can go to startupreserves.org and follow the instructions for how to sign up if you're either a volunteer or a startup.
And Zoe, just lastly, obviously, this was an idea that was born given the crisis at the moment, as you mentioned, 20 to 30% of the workforce, a lot of them being reservists that put country before anything else, including career, which is a pretty remarkable thing for such a small state to do. Where do you see this going in the future? Is there a future prospect in a sense for your idea, or is it kind of just born to deal with a crisis?
It's a great question, and it's something that we think about a lot. We, of course, want to be there while the crisis happens, and God willing, it's over, in a few weeks, and we never have to worry about this crisis again. I think that through this, awful few months that we've all been living through, we've really seen that the need for Israel and U.S. tech relationships is something that is everlasting. And so there is a lot of opportunity to pivot the initiative into a more evergreen support channel for Israeli startups.
Zoe Brian, the founder of Startup Reserves for Israel, I take my metaphorical hat off to you. Kudos to you and your husband on doing such outstanding work.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.